Welcome to Thinking Deeply About Primary Education, the podcast that makes time and space to think about pedagogy, teaching and learning, professional development, anything of interest to time poor but enthusiasm rich primary teachers. In this episode, we're going to go back into the archives to find an answer to a question from an inspirational teacher. And for those of you who are hearing it for the first time, hopefully this points you towards an episode that you may want to listen to now. As you're listening, I think it would be fantastic to think about how you might respond to this question. And why not share it in the comments wherever you're listening, whether that be YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts from. I hope you enjoy this episode, and I hope it provides useful food for thought for your professional development this year. Without further ado, let's spend some time thinking deeply about primary education. What is it that schools who provide a stellar religious education offering do so well?
I mean, we haven't. I think there was first thing I wrote was that there's a clear vision of the curriculum. I think we've covered that. The second thing was that it's sequenced in a really coherent way, and I'm just doing that now with next year's RE curriculum. We're moving from half-termly units to termly units, and I've now written all the units, so it's a matter of sequencing them, and I'm pretty excited about that because I basically get to sit down with a load of post-it notes and make what's that? I think it's from Always Sunny in Philadelphia. He's got the red string from every. That's going to be me with my curriculum map by the end of the spring term. So sequencing, and I mean you can go and read 100 billion blogs about how to properly sequence a curriculum. So many people are have a clear idea about that. Rooted in the local community, I'm really keen that our whole curriculum is strongly linked to our local areas. Primary schools have the benefit of being hyper local, so a secondary school might cover an entire town or borough, half a borough, something like that. But a primary school is hyper local, so you can really dig down into the kind of community that you're in and reflect that in your curriculum. For us, in my school, even though we're in an incredibly multicultural area in Southwark, we have a large Afro-Caribbean Christian population and a large Muslim population, so our curriculum reflects that with a focus on Islam and Christianity. I think if we were 3 miles further south, we might cover Hinduism in more depth. If we were 5 miles further north, we might cover Judaism in more depth. Also linking into the history of the local area, that's across the curriculum, and I think one of the great things that a history curriculum has is a local study. And if I was in charge of writing the RE national curriculum, which I can only dream of existing as we've discussed, I would include local study in that as well. And we do that in our school. When we look at church architecture, we look at Southwark Cathedral, and we look at modern churches in South London. When we do Islamic architecture, we start by looking at the Bait al-Fuzul Mosque in Newington. So there's rooted in the local community is so crucial, and then connected with history and geography, not in a topic way. So not like, well, we're going to do the Romans, so you might as well do Roman religion as well, but in a meaningful way of are you going to teach the Reformation before you teach the Tudors, and before you teach the Tudors? Are you going to teach the idea of pantheism as a concept before you teach the Romans? Are you going to teach? I'm running out of examples now. There are links that you can make between those, and making sure that you've done one before the other, or you're doing both simultaneously, and that the links are meaningful and not what's the word I'm looking for? Tokenistic. So we're not just doing Hinduism here because we're going to do one Hindu story in English, for example. And then, knowledge rich but not knowledge heavy. And then I wrote down a quote here that I think exemplifies what I mean by knowledge rich and knowledge heavy, and it's from the History Boys, which is I love the History Boys, and it's Hector, and he gets furious when he's been told that the boys have been learning gobbets to use in their Oxbridge exams. Gobbets of little factoids that they can roll out to sound impressive. I think that's maybe some people's idea of what is meant by cultural capital in particular, is that we equip children with these gobbets, and he says he's furious that every answer will be hung like a Christmas tree with gobbets. And I just think that's what knowledge heavy means, and knowledge rich is all about fluency. And I guess if I'm going to borrow a maths word, about mastery as well. Um, wow, I've never really thought about mastery in RE. There you go. There's a blog post coming soon to a blog near you.
Excellent. That's really clear. And actually, one of my questions was going to be about how you make that sequence. And I think the example you gave is really powerful. Like you said, because the history curriculum and the RE curriculum, they have a lot in common. And I think that'd be a really enjoyable activity to do. Would be to sit down with the history lead and talk
Mm,
about when is this most powerful to feature. And yeah, I think that's a really clear and really great example.
yeah,
And
I think that comes with seeing RE as a humanities subject. RE is a humanities subject as far as I'm concerned. Again, partisan taking a position. I know people disagree with me quite virulently on that, but for me, RE is a humanities subject.
yeah, it makes a lot of sense, and there are a lot of jigsaw pieces in my head, just sort of coming together. Having lived some of them, and even thinking about the differences in communities. And if I think about where I live and where I work, the sort of the identities of the towns are very very different. And obviously I've lived through and taught RE, but I'm putting it together with all the different ideas. It's making a whole lot of sense. So it is. And do you think that the schools who don't manage to give such a good offering, is it just the inverse, or is there anything that any pitfalls they fall into that listeners should try and avoid?
Yeah, I think it's all about this seeing RE as a special, delicate little baby that needs someone who knows everything about it in order to lead it confidently. That doesn't have right and wrong answers. You know, if we're going to write AJ Smith's 7 educational myths about RE, that's like myth number one, that RE doesn't have right and wrong answers. That I think there's muddy water around like the right to withdraw from RE. No other subject in the curriculum can parents write into schools and say, oh, I don't want my child learning French, don't believe in French. And the fact that RE is seen as this special subject has, I think, led to that right to withdraw. That hasn't caught up with the fact that in most schools RE is a non-religious subject. It's not about religious instruction. It's not about even acts of collective worship, which are a million miles away from what RE should be in 2021. So yeah, not having it like that. I think also that this idea that it's too difficult, too sensitive to teach, you should be very wary of certain things, but then you should address that explicitly. So with year two, I've just done an online course of 6 lessons on the Prophet Muhammad. Now, for me, as a Muslim, not as a Muslim, I don't choose to use the honorific "peace be upon him" in my slides or when I'm talking about it. But I know that one of the year two teachers is Muslim, and she chooses to use that when she's writing her description of it. But then we address that in lesson one. We say, some Muslims use "peace be upon him" as an honorific because of this. Also, we're not going to be doing a storyboard activity. We're not even going to be like writing our own versions or putting ourselves into the shoes of Muhammad, because those would be disrespectful. And this is for these reasons. So you explicitly address the difficulty. You make clear to students what is respectful and disrespectful. And probably err slightly on the side of caution. Maybe there are more things we could do. I was um, pretty careful putting together this PowerPoint to not include any kind of representational images of people, let alone Muhammad. So it's just like a desert and a camel and stuff. And then there's even a winged character called Burak. And I was kind of searching around as to whether I could include a statue of him that is in Indonesia, whether that would be appropriate. Um, and then I would be totally open to parents coming to me and saying, look, we felt that this was respectful, this was disrespectful. I'd also feel moderately confident to be able to rebut some things and defend the subject. Um, and that position of confidence in it is important to good RE to be able to defend your subject. You probably have to do a lot more than if you're head of maths. um, yeah, so not too sensitive. Not the other thing I wanted to mention as well. I think it came up on Twitter recently was the idea of being over ambitious. So I think that like a lot of RE is under ambitious, or not. Maybe that's unfair. Maybe not under ambitious, but just like it doesn't realize its full potential, doesn't realize how far it can go. And so we do some pretty crazy stuff, like teaching year four about Aquinas and Augustine and conscience. and we do it in a really straightforward, step by step, rose and shine, breaking things down, making sure the understanding is there, that's fine. However, I think there's a tendency, and I absolutely know it and understand it because I've been there and I've done it, and perhaps this year four module is an example of it, to be over ambitious and to be like, yeah, well, in year three, we can actually get them to understand these 400 different terms in Arabic, and like they can match them up on a matching activity, and that proves that they've got this incredible understanding of RE. Just be patient. You as a primary school teacher, you take it all the way up to year six, and you can start to do some pretty tricky, interesting stuff in year six. I've got this idea about essentialism, um, diversity, and dissent in terms of like how we teach religion. And you can get all the way to that diversity. You can teach different denominations. You can look at the history of religion. But please leave some stuff for secondary school and A level, because yeah, you can get a kid to talk about you can get a kid in year four probably to maybe just about understand act and rule utilitarianism. I mean, I think I've just about done that, but they're not going to do it again until year 12, providing they do GCSE RE and A level RE. And arguably, I think most people can get to their deathbed without really needing to understand the finer points of act utilitarianism. Pains me to say that, but somehow people cope. I don't know how, but somehow they cope. So overambition can be just as dangerous as underambition, because then you get frustrated. You're like, oh, last year I taught them, Hegel, and now they're in year four and they don't even remember it and they can't. So just stick to the basics. There's no shame in that. Religion is interesting enough, and you forget what kids don't know as well. You forget that kids in year one don't know what prayer is and have no concept, a lot of them, of God as a supernatural being. You can't just turn up and start talking about God. You really have to lay the basic foundations. So yeah, and I mean, I did put on my sheet here, I put worldviews question mark. There's a big discussion going on in RE at the moment about a name change to religion and worldviews, about what worldviews are, what it means. I mean, it's good to have that kind of like discussion. It's happened in history maybe like 10 years ago, but happening in RE now. I'm not a fan of worldviews. You can read a blog post on my blog about why I think worldviews are. Well, I think I ended it by saying something really stupid like either it's a well-meaning attempt that unfortunately opens the door up for a sort of like secularization of the subject and a slow dismantling of the subject, or it's all a grand conspiracy by secular forces to get rid of RE. Either way, I don't believe in them. I don't believe in them. I do believe in them. I believe they exist. I believe they're a way of looking at RE, but I'm not a fan. But I'm not going to spend ages talking about it because that's the real nitty gritty. And also, I've already stuck my foot in my mouth. I'll probably have like 400 direct messages after this from RE teachers who've been doing it 5 times as long as I have, telling me why I'm wrong on everything. But I guess that's the risk you take, isn't it?
No, I think it all comes from like the confidence you're describing comes from your knowledge of the subject, doesn't it? And the person who is driving RE in the school, in the best case scenario, will have a similar amount of sort of belief in what they understand RE to be, and how that looks to them. You reckon? I think because I don't think you can defend your decisions, for instance, in a conversation with a parent, as you described, unless you've got that sort of really fundamental understanding.
Yeah, I think that's maybe a bit of a fantasy scenario, though, given the situation we're in. I mean, I don't mean to disparage anyone, and it's not disparaging at all. It's just a statement of fact that most RE leads don't come from the same position that I do in terms of confidence and prior knowledge. But that's not a bad thing because we're all learning, and hopefully, people who are RE leads don't just see that as a stepping stone from into deeper roles in the school. One of the probably worst things you can do for RE is have a different RE lead every year, because that person that's seen as a stepping stone to English lead or maths lead. So I would beg schools to seek out people to be RE lead who want to do it for 3 or 4 years. Yeah, that's probably important.
Yeah, that's fair. That's a fair point. I'm happy to stand corrected on that one. Um, yeah, because yeah, I think you're right. And I think the longer we're allowed to explore our interests in such a way, being RE coordinator for a couple of years, rather than thinking that you have to become maths coordinator or English coordinator to be a success in the school is it makes a big difference, I think. But I did.
But I think, in a way, like primary benefits from a very flat management structure. So I think there's nothing to say that if a school really valued RE, I don't see why someone couldn't go from being RE lead for 5 years to being SLT. I don't see why there has to be an intermediate step. If RE is seen on the same level as other foundation subjects, and foundation subjects are seen as a serious part of the curriculum, then it should be a myth that you probably need that additional step of being English or maths coordinator. But in reality, I know that's not the case. Maybe part of being RE lead is making the case for your subject and being an advocate in a way that you don't have to do in other subjects.